Hey guys, welcome to another Warframe video, and today we're finally gonna check out Gara, the new glass Warframe that was released with update 22, Plains of Eidolon. Now first things first, you can get the blueprint for Gara by finishing the Saya's video questline, which can be picked up in Cetus on Earth, and all her other parts come as a reward from Cetus bounties. These used to be pretty hard to get, but ever since we got the update to bounty rewards, where you get a rotation reward every time you finish a stage of the bounty, it's actually not too bad. And don't worry, I'm not going to spoil the questline for you. The quest can also be picked up very early on because it only has a mastery rank requirement of 1. Now even though Gara is made out of glass, she definitely isn't squishy. She starts off with 100 health and shields, which go up to 300 at rank 30, 125 armor, 150 energy, which goes up to 225 at rank 30, sprint speed of 1.15, which is above average, and she comes with 3 polarities, 2 Vs and a D in the aura slot. Gara's abilities range from slashing or puncturing the enemies with a glass blade, protecting herself or her allies with glass shards, distracting the enemies with mirrors, or blocking them off with an impenetrable wall of glass. Her passive is also fairly neat because whenever Gara is standing in bright light, she has a chance to blind all enemies within 12 meters for 10 seconds and open them up to melee finishers. And while it only affects enemies that are within her line of sight, they don't have to be facing her. So Gara's first ability is called Shattered Lash, and this can be used in 2 different ways. You can either tap the ability, which will shoot forward a 10-meter long blade of glass that will impale everything for 800 puncture damage, or you can hold the ability down, which will cause Gara to swipe all enemies in front of her, basically hitting everything in a 180-degree arc for 800 slash damage. And this also has a range of 10 meters. Also, both the puncture version and the slash version will knock enemies back. The damage for both variations of this ability is scaled up by power strength but also melee mod, so it's kind of similar to Excalibur's Exalted Blade, Valkyr's Hysteria or Wukong's Primal Fury. Which means that if you want to get the most out of this ability and make it do as much damage as it can, you will need power strength on Gara, but you will also have to mod your melee weapon properly. And just like Exalted Blade or any of the other abilities that are similar to this, it doesn't matter which melee weapon you're using, because the ability doesn't inherit the stats of the weapon, it only looks at mods. And at the time of recording of this video, the mods you can use to scale this up are the Steel Charge Aura on Gara, Elemental Damage mod, Physical Damage mod, Specific Physical Damage mods, as well as Ribbons, assuming they have one of the previously mentioned stats. The one thing to bear in mind is that one version of this ability does pure puncture damage and the other one does pure slash, so if you're using mods that scale up slash damage, it is not going to affect the puncture variant. And finally, it does not scale with the melee combo counter, it is not affected by status mods, crit mods and range mods, and you cannot increase its damage by using weapon augments. Now, power range on this ability affects the length of the blade as well as the arc, so the more power range you add, the longer the blade is gonna be and the wider the arc is gonna be. It does not affect the thickness of the blade. And power duration has no effect on this ability whatsoever. Now, using the puncture variant of this ability, so the one where you simply tap it and it will shoot a blade forward, is a one-handed action, so you can use it while performing many other actions, including reloading. But the other variant, where you hold the ability down and Gara sweeps in front of her, is considered a two-handed action, so it will interrupt things such as reloading. And finally, even though the ability is silent, it will not grant you the stealth affinity bonus, and the casting animations on both versions are not sped up by using things such as natural talent and speed drift. Gara's second ability is called Splinter Storm, where Gara shatters her glass armor and make the shards orbit either around her, an ally or an enemy. If you want to cast this on either an ally or an enemy, they have to be within 30 meters and it will last for 22 seconds. Now the shards will stay within 2.5 meters of either yourself, your ally or an enemy, and they will do 250 damage per second and push enemies away. Now if you cast this on an enemy, it will also damage them, and if they die, it will cancel the ability. This is not too uncommon because the affected enemy will also take 35% increased damage. If cast on yourself or an ally, however, it will provide 70% damage reduction, which affects overshields, shields and health. This scales with power strength and caps out at 90% with 29% bonus power strength, so basically just maxed intensify. However, that's not the only thing that scales with power strength. Power strength also affects the damage the ability does per second, and it affects the amount of increased damage an enemy takes if you cast it on an enemy. And surprisingly, power duration affects the duration of the ability, and power range affects the range in which enemies get damaged by the shrapnel. This ability is really strong because it can provide a massive damage reduction to either yourself, your ally, your companion, summoned unit, allied unit, invasion unit, syndicate unit, rescue hostage, sortie defense operative, terminal, cryopod, excavator, Fomorian power core, cover defector, Grenier hack drone, Ostron hostage, or even an Eidolon lure. Gara's third ability is called Spectral Rage, where she creates 12 rotating mirrors that will draw enemies into their center, at which point they will start attacking the mirrors. Now this ability isn't that great, and what I think is the problem is that the enemies have to be within 4 meters of the mirrors at base to actually be lured in. So it's only really effective when you cast it on top of the enemies or you find a somewhat wide choke point. Now each mirror can take up to 800 damage, and once it does, it will shatter and release that damage back to the attacker. And if half the mirrors are shattered, the entire Spectral Rage will collapse and deal 1500 damage to all enemies inside the ring. However, and I think this is kind of like the second problem with this ability, since the mirrors are rotating rather fast, unless you have something like a bombard inside there's a pretty good chance that they're not gonna break the mirrors and the duration of the ability will simply run out. Though every now and then it will happen and they will shatter all the mirrors if they're not clipping into walls or something, and the thing will collapse. Now the damage of this ability is split equally between impact, slash and puncture, and it's also affected by power strength, and that goes for both a single mirror collapsing and the entire carousel collapsing. The ability lasts for 22 seconds at base and is affected by power duration, and power range affects the spread of the mirrors but also the number of mirrors. So the more power range you have, the bigger the ring is going to be and the more mirrors you will have. It also affects the attraction radius for enemies, though not by much. Now, there is also a synergy between Spectral Rage and Splinter Storm, because if one of the mirrors shatters and your Splinter Storm is within range, 50% of the explosion damage done by the mirror will be added to Shatter Storm's damage over time. Good job, me. And Gara's fourth and final ability is called Mass Vitrify, where she will anchor herself to the ground, cover herself in hardened glass and become invulnerable. At the same time, a massive wall of molten glass will start expanding outwards and downwards from Gara. If an enemy comes into contact with the molten wall, they'll be covered in molten glass and gradually harden over 3 seconds, at which point they'll be petrified and take 50% increased damage for the next 16 seconds, after which the glass will break and they will be free. Now, the way this ability works is you tap it once, which will anchor Gara down and the wall will start expanding. If you then either tap the ability button again or the short duration runs out, it will free Gara and the wall will solidify, which will create an impassable and indestructible barrier for the enemies. This is where the ability gets crazy, because while enemies can't walk or shoot through it, you and your allies can. You can walk through the wall, you can even shoot through the wall. It's kind of like Frost Snow Glow, but a lot better, because you can determine how big it's going to be, it doesn't have any health, it stays there for a set amount of time, and the enemies can't walk or shoot through it while you can. Now, using the ability will cost you 75 energy at base, and it will then drain 3 energy every second as you channel it. The initial horizontal radius of the wall is 2 meters and it is 3 meters tall, though it can expand up to 11 meters in width and 12 meters in height. And once again, it only expands downward, so if you're standing under a hill, it will just clip through the hill, but if you're standing on top of the hill, it will expand downwards with the hill. And once you solidify the wall and create the impassable barrier, it will stay up for 16 seconds. Now, the amount of increased damage the petrified enemies take is affected by power strength, the initial horizontal radius is affected by ability range, and the maximum horizontal radius is affected by range, but also duration, because it just allows you to channel the ability for longer, and the initial cost as well as the energy drain are both affected by power efficiency, and the drain is also affected by power duration, though not as much as efficiency. You will only notice it if you go heavily into negative duration. You won't really notice the difference between having 100 power duration and 130. And finally, duration will also affect the duration of the wall once it's been solidified, and it will also affect for how long the enemies will be petrified if they come into contact with the molten glass. Now, this ability has 2 different synergies. The first one is with Shattered Lash, because if you hit it with Shattered Lash, it will do the damage of Shattered Lash plus 600 heat damage to all enemies within 8 meters of the exterior of the wall. And the other one is with Gara's second ability, Splinter Storm, because if you have Splinter Storm active and it's within a radius of the wall on the outside and it gets shattered, it will add 50% of the explosion damage to the damage over time of Splinter Storm. And this stacks without a cap, which is pretty cool. However, it gets a little bit crazy when you also take into account that casting Mass Vitrify while you have Splinter Storm active will refresh the duration of the Splinter Storm. So if you do what I did, and you just keep stacking it up and up and up for 50 minutes, you basically just kill everything by running at them. The clip you're watching right now is me doing a 55-minute survival run on Sedna where all I did was just stack Splinter Storm. I never fired my gun and I never used my melee weapon, and I was literally just killing things by running at them because I stacked it to a point where it was ticking for like 30,000. So, you know, it's a little bit strong, you know, strong like bull, made of death. And finally we come to the conclusion. Would I recommend Gara? Yes, I would. She's a very solid Warframe. She has a lot of defensive stuff, she has a lot of crowd control, and if you play a little bit smart, a lot of damage as well. She's also fairly cheap to get because she's targeted towards newer players, so she doesn't require a ton of resources to build. However, even though I would recommend Gara, that doesn't mean that I actually like Gara, because I don't. I don't think the Warframe looks particularly nice, I think she looks pretty ugly, and same goes for the abilities, maybe with the exception of Spectral Rage. It's a shame that it's kind of meh, though this is very subjective, and I just don't like the gameplay this Warframe promotes, endlessly stacking one ability and running around with 90% damage reduction with essentially no investment whatsoever while walling off entire sections of maps. And I know some people will say that, well, it's optional, you don't have to play this way, you don't have to stack one ability until, you know, the end of times, but everything is optional, playing the game is optional, what's your point? And I know this isn't the first, like, strong frame. I mean, I remember the old Javelin Excalibur or even the old Sarin that was literally just run into a room, press 4 and everything goes and dies. But this feels like a step up from that, like an actual power creep, because not only are you able to do a lot of damage if you know how to do it, you are running around with a 90% damage reduction with just one mod, you only need Intensify for that, while being able to wall off an entire sections of the map. I don't know, maybe I'm just a grumpy old fart, but Gara is just not fun for me, but she might be fun for you, which is why I recommend her even though I don't like her. And that's pretty much it for the video, so I thank you very much for watching. As always, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.